And I turned around and walked away from it because it was late. It was about 5 o'clock, and I'd been on the go for several days. But something made me turn around and go back, and I took the phone call, and it was Sabino Archuleta, who was up on the mountain when it took off, and he called me and he said, hey Benny, he said, we got burned over. I said, what do you mean you got burned over? We got burned over and there's some people died. And I said, any of our guys? And he said, yeah, I think so. And I said, where are you? We're in Glenwood Springs. I said, okay, let me make some phone calls. So Bob Cunningham and Todd had gone over, and as they were leaving, before I went to the phone, I told them, just order me a hamburger. And I knew what restaurant we were going to, so I drove over there. And as soon as I walked in, Cunningham looked at me and he said, something's bad. I said, yeah, we just had a burn over. I said, we better go start making some phone calls. So I went to dispatch, called the regional office, and there were so many fires, they couldn't get me a charter airplane. So I finally got a flight out of there at 4 o'clock in the morning in a charter airplane to Grand Junction. And Todd Onken went with me. Cunningham said, you know what, you better not go alone. I said, no, you guys are busy down here. You better stay focused down here. And he said, no, we're not going to let you go alone, Benny. Todd's going to go with you. And there was a time and place when my foreman would stand their ground and I knew they were looking out for me. I said, okay, so Todd went. So we got there and I met the coordinator, Paul Hefner, and I knew him from other dealings. I'd known him for quite a while. And he said, oh, we got you a rental. He said, do you mind taking the district FMO for Prineville up to Glenwood Springs? I said, no, not at all. Because by then, I already knew that 9 Primo were missing, but we already pretty well knew, because I had talked to a lot of the jumpers on the phone by then that had survived, and so we had a pretty good picture of what had gone on. So anyway, the district FMO for Prineville comes out, and it's a guy named Bruce Cheney. Bruce Cheney, I had not seen him since June of 1972, and he was a squad leader at Redmond, Oregon, and he was one of my trainers. And we looked at each other, and I remember he says, what a hell of a way to see each other again, huh, Benny? I said, yeah. So we drove up to Glenwood Springs, and got to the motel where the rest of his crew was, and I'll never forget these young kids that were sitting up and down the stairway to the second floor. They were leaning over the balcony, and I stopped. I remember we're in a convertible Jeep with a canvas top, and he got out of the Jeep and they saw him, and they all immediately flocked around him. And of course they were pretty emotional, and so I just said, it's time for me to leave, and so I just left, and we already knew where the jumpers were, so we got to the motel where they put the jumpers. And I got out and walked in the foyer, and I met Dave Bunnell. Dave Bunnell was a fire staff on the Flathead at the time. And Dave Bunnell and I had butted heads over the years on jumper use. We weren't exactly the best of friends, but we certainly have a totally different relationship after what we went through together. But anyway, he was there. He says, Benny, they won't talk to anybody. They said they're not talking to anybody till you get here. I said, where are they? They're on the 4th floor. So I went up, and the first one I met was Sarah Doring. Got off the elevator and got all the jumpers together, and you know, they were very, very collected, distraught, but collected. Pardon?
How many were there?
Well, the whole bunch that deployed on the Lunch Ridge, what were there, 9? And I think there was 9. I might be wrong in the exact number. But anyway, so I said, what do you guys want to do? He said, we want to go see Hipke in the hospital. And he said, oh yeah, there were some Jumpers too. And then we want to get the heck out of here. So I went downstairs and got a bus. They had some buses staged there. And I remember this one guy come over to me, he says, you can't take that bus you don't have a resource order to do. And I said, no, I don't. And I said, I need to get the jumpers down to Glenwood Springs that survived the fire up there. That's what the bus is for. The guy says, well, I won't let you take the bus unless you have a resource order. And the bus driver says, hey buddy, I don't need a resource order for that. I'll pull up front. And he did. He pulled up front, got the jumpers in. We went down to the hospital. And we saw Hipke. He was the one survivor. Talked to him, and everybody went in first, and I was the last guy to go in and see him, and I already knew him. And I walked in there, and he looked at me, and he kind of smiled at me, and he says, you know, he says, Benny, did you ever play football? And I said, yeah, I did. He said, did you ever have somebody stick their helmet right in the small of your back when you weren't looking? And I said, yeah. He said, that's what it felt like when the fire hit me when I went over the top. And I said, how you doing? He said, I'm okay. Okay. I said, well, I'm going to take the guys back down. We'll keep tabs on you. So we got on the bus and went down to Glenwood Springs, which is quite a ride. And every jumper sat in a different seat. Nobody sat with anybody. And I went and sat with every individual jumper. Some of them talked to me. Some of them didn't want to talk. And then when we got to Glenwood Springs, of course, there was a zoo. And there was everybody from National Geographic to CNN to ABC, NBC, everybody was there. And it was a real zoo. And so you'll never see me in an interview. And you won't see me in any books or anything, because at that point in time, I knew I had a fatality. And of course that was Don Mackey. And I knew that we still had a long ways to go before we got those folks home. So my focus was on, I was already talking to the regional forester with the regional director, and my boss, Joe Wagenfer, we were on the phone constantly. And then it took us 5 days to get the final identification on the bodies and get everybody ready to take home. So those, between the parachute fatality and Storm King, they were challenging. I went through two pretty challenging years. Right after Storm King, we ended up with over 200 Smokejumpers in Missoula. We transitioned right into one hell of a fire season. So there was, we went from the fatality and dealing with bringing them home, the memorial services, right into the tremendously busy season. So we didn't have a chance to, sit back and try to recover. We had to go through the fire season and then do whatever we had to do afterwards.
Do you think there's something about going through the experience of being trained and experienced Smokejumper that imbues people, regardless of how they come, with some kind of character or values? Or any thoughts on that? What you've seen?
I'm not sure I'm tracking.
Well, when people come in, they come from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of geographical situations, and they go through this training, and then they go through the different challenges with every jump, really. Do you think it creates something that they have in common?
I believe the jumpers are just naturally have a lot of qualities and interests and drive that they want to become jumpers, especially the ones that go it for years and years and years. There's something there that drives you just to be a jumper. There's something in you that's different than mainstream society, I believe. I mean, you got to be off your rocker to want to jump out of airplanes into the mountains, for one thing. But it's a challenge, and we want it. And then I think when you go through the training and you become that jumper that you wanted to be, that camaraderie that they talk about, I mean, there's just a bond that you find in very few places. I think there's some military units that create those kinds of bonds, but I think the Smokejumper bond is very unique unto itself, and I think it does mold you into being a different person after you become a jumper.